Spinosaurus shouldn't have existed, at least not as a predator. Almost everything about its body breaks the rules evolution had spent 300 million years writing for large land carnivores. And yet there it was, the animal with the biggest jaws that ever walked this planet. Bigger than T-Rex, bigger than Giganotosaurus, bigger than anything you can name. And here's the part that still gets under my skin. Until surprisingly recently, we had no real idea what it actually was. Subscribe now, because what comes after this is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. Stay with me. For decades, paleontologists looked at the remains of Spinosaurus and agreed on almost nothing. How it moved, what it ate, whether it walked on 2 legs or 4. An animal 17 meters long, possibly more than 9 tons, and science couldn't settle something as basic as whether it lived on land or in water. That kind of argument doesn't happen with ordinary dinosaurs. It happens when nature builds something so far outside the known categories that we don't have a box to put it in. And here's the detail that stopped me cold the first time I read it. Spinosaurus lived around 95 million years ago in what is now the north of Africa. Today that region is desert. Back then it was a vast river system, warm and dense, with channels wide enough for this animal to move through them in comfort. Comfort. Hold on to that word, because it's the key to the whole thing. Paleontology took nearly a century to say the next part out loud. Spinosaurus lived in the water. It was semi-aquatic. And once you accept that, everything else falls into place. Think about what that means. The largest carnivore in the entire history of the dinosaurs ruled the rivers. It lived between the water and the bank like a crocodile the size of an articulated bus, with a sail on its back that could rise more than 1 meter and 80 centimeters into the air. A long, narrow snout, rows of smooth, cone-shaped teeth, and front limbs that, depending on which study you read, may have helped it swim more than they helped it grab. Every mold we had for the great theropods, this animal broke. That is why we ignored it for so long. The story of how we came to know what we know about Spinosaurus is almost as unsettling as the animal itself. The first remains were found by a team led by the German paleontologist Ernst Stromer in Egypt between 1912 and 1914. Stromer knew he had something extraordinary. The bones were too big, too different from anything catalogued up to that point. He shipped them to Munich. He studied them for years, published his findings, and gave the animal its name. Then came the Second World War. On the night of the 24th of April 1944, Allied bombers struck Munich, and the museum holding the original Spinosaurus fossils took a direct hit. The bones burned. The only physical record we had of the largest predator among the dinosaurs was reduced to dust in a single night. What survived were Stromer's drawings, his notes, his measurements. For decades, Spinosaurus was rebuilt from those pages, the way you might try to rebuild a symphony from somebody's memory of how it once sounded. The picture that came out of it was wrong in ways we can now measure. And that is exactly what makes the next chapter so gripping, because the story doesn't end with the war. It starts again in 2014. A team led by the paleontologist Nizar Ibrahim published a paper in the journal Science that shook the field harder than anything had in a long time. Ibrahim had found new remains in Morocco, in the Kem beds, and those bones contradicted almost everything we thought we knew. Hit like right now, because it tells the algorithm this kind of story deserves to reach more people. And it does. Start with the legs. The hind legs of Spinosaurus were short. Extraordinarily short for a theropod that size. That matters more than it sounds. The big carnivores that walked on 2 legs, animals like T-Rex or Giganotosaurus, need long, powerful hind legs to work on land. Take those legs away and you can't run. Can't hunt efficiently on solid ground. Those stubby legs were the clue nobody had read correctly. This animal was never built to chase prey across firm earth. There's more. The bones of Spinosaurus were dense and compact. Animals that need to sink and hold themselves underwater, like today's crocodiles, grow bones heavier than those of land animals. Because that weight gives them control below the surface. It lets them dive and stay under without fighting to do it. The bones of Spinosaurus had exactly that profile. A land theropod carrying bones like that would have been slow and clumsy. In the water, the same weight turned into an advantage. And the snout. That long, narrow snout looked nothing like the mouth of a T-Rex, which was built to crush and hold large, struggling prey. It looked almost identical in shape to the jaws of a gharial, the crocodile that specializes in nothing but catching fish. The teeth matched that story. Straight cones instead of the serrated, saw-edged blades of a land carnivore. Perfect for stabbing and gripping slippery bodies as they twist to escape underwater. Then there's something I never found in any popular documentary when I started digging into this. Something I could barely believe when I read it in the original study. At the tip of the Spinosaurus snout sat a cluster of tiny pits in the bone, very close to what modern crocodiles have. Those pits hold pressure receptors that sense movement in the water, which means Spinosaurus may have been able to feel a fish moving without ever seeing it. A biological sensor sitting just under the river's surface. If that reading holds, and there's still debate, then we're talking about a predator that could hunt in the dark, underwater, tracking the ripples its prey left behind. Science fiction would have thrown that out for being too much. Wait though, because there's one more layer, and it's the one that took me the longest to process. Spinosaurus could move inside the water. A study published in 2020 in the journal Nature, again with Ibrahim on the team, analyzed the shape of the tail and compared it against modern animals, both swimmers and land dwellers. The Spinosaurus tail was tall and flattened from side to side, and it worked like a propulsion fin. Sweep it left to right, and the animal generated thrust the way no other known theropod could. In plain terms, this was an active swimmer, a hunter that worked inside the river itself. Driven by that tail, its whole body shaped for a world it took us 100 years to understand. Here's where I have to be honest with you, because the story hasn't fully closed. The swimming picture has loud critics. Back in 2018, the paleontologist Donald Henderson ran flotation models on a Spinosaurus body and came away with a problem. The animal was so buoyant that holding itself underwater would have been a real fight, more like trying to dive while hugging a barrel. His version pictures Spinosaurus wading through the shallows and snatching fish from the surface, closer to a giant heron than a crocodile. Then other teams fired back, pointing at those dense bones and that paddle of a tail as evidence for real diving. The argument is still going, and that back and forth is the point. You're watching a piece of science get argued out in real time, with the fossils barely out of the ground and the conclusions changing paper by paper. And then comes the question no study has fully answered. Why the sail? That structure down its back, built from neural spines that in places rose past 1.80 meters, is the most visible thing about Spinosaurus and, strangely, the thing we understand least. The ideas are many, and none of them has won. Some researchers think it was a hump like a bison's, a store of fat for lean seasons. Others argue it was a true sail held up to the sun to manage body temperature, a prehistoric solar panel. Others point to display, a structure visible from a distance, used to signal dominance or readiness to mate to others of its kind. I don't know which is right, nobody knows for certain. And instead of frustrating you, that should make you feel something else entirely. We are living in the moment this story is being written. The fossils that will settle it could be coming out of the ground somewhere in North Africa right now. What we do know is the world it lived in. And that world is extreme enough to deserve its own moment. The Kem beds in what are today Morocco and Algeria were 95 million years ago one of the most hostile places that has ever existed on this planet. The danger came from the water itself. This was a network of enormous rivers, dense and warm, with a concentration of large predators per square kilometer that paleontologists have called, without exaggeration, the most dangerous predator ecosystem in the entire fossil record. In the same river where Spinosaurus hunted, freshwater sharks swam at the size of a grown adult. Crocodile relatives more than 8 meters long, like Sarcosuchus, older and heavier than any crocodile alive today. Giant lungfish the length of a canoe. Coelacanths as big as a person. Turtles, rays, sawfish with rows of teeth running down a snout like a hedge trimmer. And on the banks, other great theropods like Giganotosaurus, which in weight and bite force was Africa's answer to T-Rex. Stack all of that into one river valley, and you get a place that has puzzled paleontologists for a simple reason. There seem to be too many giant meat-eaters and not enough to feed them. One of the leading explanations is Spinosaurus itself. By dropping into the water and living off fish, it pulled itself out of the fight for land prey and let the whole crowded system hold together. Spinosaurus shared that region with plenty of other predators. What set it apart was the way it stopped competing with them. It moved into the one space no other animal that size had colonized, the water. And that is the part of this story I find hardest to shake. Spinosaurus was a specialist to the bone. Evolution shaped it over millions of years for a niche so precise that its whole life depended on those rivers staying exactly as they were. When the climate shifted and the rivers of the Chem began to shrink, Spinosaurus had nowhere to go. Its body was built for that one drowned world. When the world dried, the animal went with it. There's something in that which reaches past paleontology. It reads almost like a warning. The largest predator ever to stand on solid ground was brought down by a shifting climate. The rivers it depended on dried up, and its body had nowhere left to belong. If this story left you thinking, there's another video on this channel you shouldn't miss. It follows another giant of the Cretaceous that also ruled a place nobody else dared to occupy, and also paid a price for that specialization. The link is right there. But before you go, one last thing. Spinosaurus has spent nearly a century sitting in African rock, full of unanswered questions. Stromer found it. The war erased it. Ibrahim brought it back. And every new study since has shown the animal to be stranger, more extreme, and more fascinating than anyone had guessed. We're not done. There are neural spines still unclassified, bones still unstudied. Questions science hasn't even been able to ask yet, because it doesn't have the data to frame them. Spinosaurus is still, in a lot of ways, a mystery with bones. For someone who has spent years obsessed with these creatures, that open ending is a gift. It's the whole reason it's worth going back to the rock and looking again. Subscribe if you enjoyed this and tell me in the comments, what do you think the sale was really for? I have a hunch, but I want to hear yours first.